Welcome to the Lifeletics Podcast, a brand dedicated to the growth of athletes as they transition to life after sports. My name is Megan Rutter, former D1 swimmer at Florida Atlantic University. My goal here is to make all athletes feel empowered to take on the sport of life. On today's episode, we're going to speak with Alice McCall. She flew over 4,000 international miles from the UK to the US in order to pursue her collegiate career. From swimming her whole life, she had an absolute passion for the sport. And once she decided she needed to stay in the US, she decided to channel that passion into coaching. She now continues to mentor and guide athletes as they go throughout their career into life. And we are so excited to hear her perspective on this transition. Welcome, Alice. I am so excited to have you on here. It's been a little while since we've caught up. And I guess I just want to start off by talking a little bit about your swimming background, your collegiate career, and really just go into how you ended up where you are now.
Yeah, so I'm super happy to be here. I know this is a long process for you to kind of get this going, and it's fun to see it actually coming together. And I'm really excited to be one of your first on the podcast. So Thanks for having me. So yeah, a little bit about me. I'm originally from the UK. I was a swimmer pretty much my whole life. I did a few other sports growing up, but swimming really, transitioned to that main sport probably around 12, 13 years of age. In my time in the UK, I ended up on the national team for open water. So that's when I really, started to realize that I could probably use swimming as part of a career development for myself and just life development in general. So I had reached out to a couple of universities in the US, really just one more than the others, but it kind of just all worked out. And I didn't take an official visit. I didn't take really any kind of, I didn't do too much research other than just phone calls. This was in 2009, 2010. So, I mean, we had the internet, of course, but it was just a little bit different than times now. There was no Zoom. My phone calls were true phone calls, international phone calls. So I got to know the coach, and we decided for me to go to the US, and that was the fall of 2010. So that's where I started my collegiate career. I went to SMU in Dallas, Texas. I spent 4 years there. And then around my sophomore year, I realized that I probably wanted to stay in the US. But then it was like, okay, well, how do I do that? And I, self-admittedly hadn't really gone into college with a career in mind. So I was, I got my undergrad degree in sociology. I got a minor in sport management.
And now you were just on a student visa, right?
Yeah, so it's called an F1. So I was on a student visa for 4 years. So pretty much gets you through graduation. So yeah, I had about 2 years left in college where I was like, okay, I want to stay here, but I got to figure out how. I had a really good relationship with my head coach. During my time on the team, we had quite a few assistants coming and going for various reasons. And so he was the guy that, was always there. He'd seen the progression of recruiting me and through the years of ups and downs just within collegiate athletics itself. And just those couple formative years, especially coming over here. So he knew me very well. And he was like, well, why don't you give coaching a go? I was like, I don't really want to wake up at 5 o'clock every morning. Like once I'm, once I'm done,
I'm done.
Yeah, I'd kind of like to be done with that. But, I looked at it a little bit more seriously and more as, why do people coach and why do people stay within the sport? I was like,
That's so interesting. What did you like while you're researching all of that? What were some findings on why people stay in the sport?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, a lot of people will say they do it to help people grow. Yeah. And, I think that for us, our sport is swimming, and whatever sport that, other coaches and athletes may participate in, the sport is not always the like all-encompassing part of why we do what we do. And even as an athlete, yeah, we chose swimming, but it, you know, a lot of people will say, well, it was the team environment. It added to structure to my life. It allowed me to go into college and potentially be on a scholarship to afford a degree, or, you know, there's a lot of different reasons why people are involved in collegiate athletics. But I think from a coaching perspective, a lot of what I found was like, I just really love, you know, bringing people in when they're on average 18 years old, and then watching them when they're 22, like walk across the stage. And I know that I've been a part of that.
Yeah.
And for, you know, for us, like as far as the product of swimming fast, you know, that's our job, is to help people swim fast. But there's so much underwater, that's, not to use a pun, but like there's so much happening underwater that a lot of people don't see, that as coaches we also are able to influence and guide student athletes, and it can be very rewarding. And I think that's why a lot of people do it. It's extremely tough, because not only are you trying to compete at a certain level, you're also dealing with just the day-to-day of 18 to 22-year-old young men and women that are also trying to figure it out. So, but I like swimming fast and accomplishing, whether it's conference championships or even national championships, that those things are really exciting and really fulfilling. But watching the student athletes achieve their goals is a whole other level of, you know, why we do this. So yeah, that's kind of what I found. And I was like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. Like, I guess I'll give it a shot. So
yeah. And now it's been how long since you've been coaching?
So I started coaching in the fall of 2014. So it's starting to be a while now.
Yeah.
So I went straight into Division I coaching. I had a great guy, Chris Peters. He gave me a shot at a university up north in Ohio, University of Toledo. Worked with him for 2 years, and then I moved down to South Florida, where I was on staff at Florida Atlantic for 4 or 5 years. And then I moved across to, you know, my latest move, back to the Dallas-Fort Worth area over at TCU.
How does it feel being back in like kind of your stomping grounds?
Yeah, it's good. It's, you know, I think just in life, you know, as you start to gain more experience and momentum in what you're doing, you have more choices, you know. And I knew that this last move for me was really important on a lot of elements, some professionally, some personally. And one of the personal ones, just being from the UK, all of my family is still in the UK. I've made over the past 11 years really good friends in the US, but you know, some of those are in that DFW area. And if they're not in the DFW area, a lot of them were from SMU. And so it could be a home base for us. The area is familiar. I still have people here that I know very well. Our head coach is still at SMU, and I, you know, very much still keep in contact with him, and, you know, very influential person in my life. So it was a good move. I was fortunate that it was a good move, both professionally and personally.
Amazing. I love that for you. Do you feel like, I guess, in your first space, like where you came into coaching right out of college, was it like weird being on the whole other side of athletics? I mean, that's like your first break into like, okay, now I'm on the deck and I'm not in the pool. And like, what was that like in your head?
Yeah, it was interesting. And like some of it I don't remember as well as I almost wish I did, just because you kind of get thrown in and you go, you know. And so I swam in college on a single gender team, but we also had a men's team. We didn't do anything together. So it wasn't essentially what we call co-ed. It was two separate programs. So
Right.
as much as I was around the men, we didn't do everything together. So then my first position, it was just single gender, and there wasn't a men's team. So it was very much single gender. And so that was a little bit of an adjustment to me, just to kind of see how the athletes interacted with one another. But it was really interesting. I want to say around October, November is probably when I was like, oh, I kind of miss competing myself.
Yeah.
And I think by the time that I was done with my swimming career, I was ready for it to be done. I was at peace with it. I had had a great experience. It was just time to move on to the next chapter of my life. And then once I was around it again, I felt fulfilled in a way that I was still able to be around the sport, just in a different element. And I was really enjoying not having to be the competitor. I was enjoying being in a different way. But when we kind of hit that mid-season time, I was like, oh, it would be kind of like fun to be doing this.
Yeah.
So, but
All
I
the
don't think
exciting parts we
overall,
want to do. But
yeah,
then when it's like
exactly.
hell week practice, we're like, ah,
Yeah,
that's good.
yeah. So, and I think just like from a coaching standpoint, it was interesting because it was my first job.
Hmm.
It was actually my first ever job. I had never been employed before,
Oh my
um,
gosh.
which for some people is kind of hard to believe, just being that age. But I had always put a lot of work into my swimming, and then just being in the US as an international person, I didn't have really the resources to work
Right.
with the visas provided. The only place that you can work is usually on campus, but as you know, between the hours of being a student athlete and whatnot, it was really hard to kind of nail anything like that down. So
Right.
yeah, it was my first job, so it was a lot at once, but it was fortunately in something that I already knew. I knew how things should
Hmm.
run, and I really attribute my experience there to the head coach, because he wasn't only patient, but he also just kind of like threw me in the deep end too, which I appreciated, because I that's how I learned. But he was all, if I did make a mistake, he was always ready to help A, recover the mistake, but B, then teach me how to, how to navigate that in the
Right.
future. So it was a good experience.
Yeah. And now I mean, I guess you feel like having those influences in your life as coaches might have sparked your interest in becoming one of those influences in other athletes' life. Because I know personally, all of the people that I know that have worked under you, or I say worked because being a student athlete is basically working.
Right.
Um, but they've all truly looked up to you and just have felt that your influence, your way of, being a hard ass, but also being so genuine and authentic at the same time really like meshes well. So do you say that like all the people that you were coached by really just kind of nailed that in?
Yeah, I think it probably started a little bit when I was younger. Like when I was little, I was on a team that was very age diverse. And so
Mhm.
like when I was 11, I was training with 18-year-olds, and sometimes in the same lane, but not always. And so I was just always around different abilities as well, and talent levels. And some of those we had our club was actually one in the northwest of England that was quite known for having national team members. But it was a really old school coach, and he would just he'd write practice on the board and sit on deck, and we just kind of got on with it. And it wasn't that he never coached us, because I remember so much of his coaching, but what I do remember most is that he just genuinely cared about us, and he wanted us to achieve, the things in life that we wanted to achieve. And the things that were important to him was like, well, be on deck on time, because then you get to do the full workout, which will ultimately make you better. And so I think there's definitely some of that I have in my coaching. Even just Steve Collins, like Steve at SMU, he was my first experience as far as NCAA coaching, which is different to being in the UK. And he very much treated us like his own children in some respects, you know. And I say that as far as like, you just always felt that he cared. And I think if you ask any of my teammates, I don't think anyone could really put their finger on what that means, but we knew it was a feeling, right? And it's that whatever the saying is like, people remember how you made them feel, not what you said to them, kind of feeling. And that's, you know, we always felt at home with him, and we still all have great relationships with him. And yeah, he's a family guy himself, but he brought that into coaching because, and we had a lot of internationals on our team. So he knew that he was bringing people away from their families. And so then it's like, well, how can I help that? How can I make this environment comfortable for these 18 to 22-year-olds that some of us were living across the world? And so I do have a lot of empathy for people that are moving far away from home. And I've always said, like, even if you're moving from the next state over, you're still moving away from home. You're still moving away from your environment that you've known for 18 years. Ultimately, I am a big believer, and maybe it's because I've done it myself and I'm still here and I'm okay, but you also sign up for that when you move away. You sign up for missing, you know, family events, and you sign up for all of that stuff. So
it's almost like the transition from that, you know, club swimming to college swimming for some people can almost be the harder transition than out of college, because you are moving away, you're moving into a whole different environment, new friends, new expectations regarding practicing and school and all that stuff. And yeah, like you said, a lot of people deal with their language barriers, things like that, especially when they come international. You thankfully had a really good team that brought you in. And what about the people who don't kind of get that?
No, and that's a great question. And, you know, just in my job now in recruiting, it is something that I always tell recruits. I'm like, look, we really want you. We're really interested in you. But if this isn't the right place for you, then it's not the right place for you. And that's okay. Because the last thing, at least in my philosophy in recruiting and then coaching these people, is I don't want them to be transferring in 2 years. And I definitely don't want it to be because of, you know, we kind of fake sold the team or the school up front, or our philosophies, you know, like it is sales, but it's not about bringing people to the university just so that we can have a fast team. Ultimately, that's what we want, but we want to make sure that the right people are coming. And, you know, it doesn't happen everywhere. And there's still sometimes it just doesn't work out. And, you know, that's okay. And I think it's really bold when people, and brave when people come and they say, I want to transfer, or I want to quit. You know, it's not always the best thing that a coach wants to hear, but it's also a brave thing. And ultimately, if that person is doing what's probably best for them, then it's great. And there's always a student athlete that, you know, maybe they have to transfer to be back home because a family member's sick, or you know, and those are just unfortunate circumstances. But outside of that, I think if you're doing your due diligence in the recruiting process, it shouldn't necessarily mean that people are leaving for, you know, cultural or philosophy issues. You know, I think some of that falls on the coaching side, but some of it also falls on the recruits as well, to make sure that they are vetting out these schools, make sure that they're taking visits, make sure that they are talking to their club coaches, because as collegiate coaches, we have relationships with club coaches and high school coaches. You know, is that person just shooting off emails to 100 schools, or are they being really picky and doing their research on what's best for them? I mean, there's recruits that I talk to, and it has ranged over the years, but if I'm at a small school, they're like, oh yeah, I want a really big school. And I'm like, well, you've not done your research on our school before you
Yeah.
reached out. And it's okay, to have those conversations and help them learn in their process too, even if it's not that they end up coming to the school that I'm at, to then be able to help them like, okay, well, the next phone call you have, maybe do a little bit more research. Um, but I do think that some people, they just don't do enough research, and
Right.
there's never enough research, unfortunately, because something's always not going to turn out how you want it to be. But I
Hmm.
do think that it's an important part of making that transition going into college, especially into collegiate athletics.
Definitely. I know one of my really good friends, she is a recruiter as well, and I got to
Yeah.
interview her. She spoke a lot about basically just treating like the job that you find after college like dating, and same like you're saying, it's like treat the school that you're going to go spend 4 years and like devote your like blood, sweat, and tears to, like dating, you know, find out the pros and cons, find out what you don't like. And obviously you don't really know it too much until you're in it. Kind of like you're saying, sometimes it's never too much research, but I think it's such a good point to just like really vet out where you're going to go.
Yeah, and I think that then transitions into life too, like whether it is
For
dating
sure.
or just, I'm thinking more just even into that like interviewing process for jobs. Like
Mm-hmm.
you and your first job, your first or second job, depending on the field, like you just might not know what you're doing, and that's totally
Mm-hmm.
fine. But as you go through the years of experience, it's like, okay, I know what I want and I know what to look for. Like if you're, at least in collegiate athletics, you're probably on a phone interview or maybe these days on a Zoom interview, and then you go on campus. And so it's like, all right, what are the things I want to see on campus? Like, what is going
Mm-hmm.
to help me thrive in this job that I want to be able to see? Who do I want to meet with? And some of that's already pre-planned for you. But in my experience, I've also been given the opportunity to put forth some recommendations of people that I might want to meet with as well.
Right.
And so starting out that vetting process in your recruiting process is transferable later in life, because it's teaching you what's important to you, what do you want, but it's also teaching you that what you want might not happen and you need to be okay with that too.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
I agree. I think they're all very transferable skills.
for sure. I know as a college athlete and then going into the real world, a lot of like mental health on that can be
Yeah.
very difficult. It can take a dive. It can be amazing. I think a lot of student athletes mostly just deal with the struggle of who am I? What am I doing? Is this right? Is that right? And I guess I'm just curious from a coach's perspective, like where's the best place you feel they should outlet all of that?
Yeah, so that's actually it's interesting and it's a big question. I mean, mental health it's always been around, but it's definitely more and more becoming a topic that is less taboo. It's a topic that people are talking about more. It's a topic that people are more comfortable with talking about more.
Which I
Um,
love.
yeah, and whether it is their own experience or whether it's just talking about it in general,
Right.
um, it's becoming more and more apparent to us that this is something that we maybe have ignored for too long.
Mhm.
Um, and I will be curious to see where we're at with it in another 10 years, because I think in the past 10 years, it's grown a lot as far as its exposure. Um, and so I am curious to see where it goes. I think for student athletes, and in all honesty, this for everyone in the world, there are so many resources these days, whether it's apps or whether it's phone call, like calling services, or whether it's Zoom calls, like if you need to go and see a psychologist or a therapist or however you want to label that person, just that someone's talked to. It used to be that you have to book an appointment and you have to
Right.
go in, and these offices were very, kind of tucked away, and it wasn't apparent. Whereas now, like, you could do therapy over Zoom, or you could call a number and you could talk to someone, or you could be on an app, and meditation apps are really great at sometimes channeling or navigating mental health. And so I think that student athletes aside, just for everybody, those things are available.
Right.
And I do believe it, how available they are to you is how hard you try to make them available to you. The availability of them is there. And I think it's really great that some of these apps and programs are doing it at a low cost, because ultimately in the past, it's $200 to go and see someone to talk to, and
Right.
very, very, very few people have that. And so to make it more accessible is a great thing. So I'll start by saying that. And then as far as student athletes, yes, our world, and I say our world because I feel like I'm sometimes still in it, but our world is different to a regular student. And that 18 to 22-year-old is going through a lot of formative life decisions. The amount of people that potentially lose a parent while they're in college, or something big happens with their family that maybe they financially can't finish their college, or it puts them into that 5th and 6th year. And there's a lot of life-changing things that happen over those 4 years potentially. Some go through and nothing happens. Some go through and their whole life is different at the end of that 4-year period. And so different people need it at different levels. And I think more than anything, the generation that we're dealing with now that's in college, they need the instant gratification on so many things. And I think a lot of that comes from social media. And they want things now, and they want it done well. And I don't think that there's really anything wrong with that. I just don't think that everybody in the world is fully equipped to deal with that just yet. And so what I do find is that sometimes student athletes, they'll say, oh, I need to talk to someone, but then it's like, oh, I don't like them, I'm not going to go again. And it's because on that first session they didn't feel better, and they didn't come out of it feeling perfect again. And my advice would be, like, you've got to stick it out for at least 4 sessions, and whatever that session looks like, maybe it is 10-minute meditations, or maybe it is hours of therapy. I don't know, whatever that is for you. But I think you got to give it at least 4 goes. And then if you really don't see any difference, sure, maybe it is time to look elsewhere. But there's people and student athletes that some of them don't have the tools to deal with life. They've never been taught. They have maybe not been brought up in a family that has been able to offer them those tools. Or they just haven't been told how to do it. But then there's also people that have been given those tools, and maybe just every once in a while they just need sharpening, and that's fine too. And I think so there's a whole, mental health is such a big topic, and there's such a spectrum on who needs what and who needs certain things. But I think that it can't just be expected that it's fixed straight away. And I listened to quite a few podcasts, some just, kind of girl talk, and some more probably educational. And I listened to I'm finding a theme that quite a lot of people in their 40s are going to therapy to pretty much undo 20, 30 years of their life. Because, they've packed so much down that now they're like, oh no, like I actually have to kind of stick with this. And it's like a 2-year process. And there again, maybe that 2-year process could be done when you're 18 to 22, and it's not as taboo now, which is great. So maybe when this generation is 40, maybe they're better off for it. Because I see more and more student athletes going to and utilizing the services. But I think what they could do better is to really just embrace the consistency. And there's a lot of moving on to the next, and that goes with everything in their life. There's a lot of, okay, I've done this, what's next? And sometimes it can't be that way. Sometimes it can, but sometimes it can't. And I think mental health is probably one of those things that you just really need to sit in it and really embrace those that help
It's
sometimes.
not something you can just like check the box on. Like,
Yeah.
oops, done. It's
Yeah.
like, no, this is going to be an ongoing thing. There's going to be different things that happen in your life. And, your job, your boss might say something to you that honestly like broke you down. That
Yeah.
might happen 5 weeks after your last session.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work. It's an ongoing thing because life is an ongoing thing. So, um, I always like to say that like our mind is one of the biggest muscles in our body. And like if we don't work it out and if we don't really focus on it and work it, we'll lose it and we'll go
Yeah.
crazy.
No,
And
I agree. I agree. And I would hope that as a coach, it is sometimes hard as a coach, because it kind of in the traditional sense of a coach, you're asking people to do things.
mhm,
And sometimes with mental health, it can be difficult. Um, and so there is that fine line of knowing your student athletes and kind of going back to that whole tool analogy, like, is this someone that has the tools or is this someone that doesn't have the tools?
mhm,
Because how you then treat them as a coach can be very different. And if i'm if I'm coaching an athlete that I know has come to college for a better life, let's
mhm.
say, then there's a lot more to my job than just checking if they're happy or sad, you know? Whereas if someone is just maybe having an off day and they deep down know what they need to do, but they're maybe in a funk and they're not accessing those things. Maybe it's just me being like, hey, have you talked to your therapist yet? Or have you gone and
Yeah.
taken your walk? Or have you gone and, made sure that you do your homework so that
Mhm.
tomorrow it's not an issue? And so that's just part of our job, I think, on mental health is just really knowing our athletes. And then, as always, making sure that we're sending them to the professionals because we're not professionals in mental health.
Right.
And that's also something really important. It is important to me that if someone is struggling with their mental health, whether I think it's minimal or not, to them, it's their mental health and they
Yeah.
need to see a professional. And then if they choose not to, then, I have at least helped guide them to a professional setting, which is really
Mhm.
ultimately that's the most paramount thing is that they do have access to those professionals.
Absolutely. I know, and that's one thing, like you're saying, over the last 10 years that has totally been talked about a lot more and has been more readily available, which is amazing. And I definitely want to get those resources out there more. Are you familiar with which apps those are?
I can send a list over.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, like a lot of it are apps that I hear on like podcast
Podcast.
breaks,
Yeah.
yeah, or podcast themselves if maybe that person has used them or um or maybe they're interviewing someone that has
Mhm.
has started one. But I think Talkspace is one, I want to
Oh,
say.
yeah. Hmm.
Um but I think it is important just to have like a small list in your back pocket. And I do think that's something that universities do quite well on is usually they have a counseling center. Depending on the level of the athletic department, there's usually someone that is maybe more sports specific too.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, not every department has that has access to that, and usually it's budgetary, which is really sad that sometimes budgets are put into different things that,
Right.
in my opinion, in the long run are not as important.
Right.
Um, and so, you'll often find departments that can't fully fund a athletic specific psychologist or psychiatrist that they will
Right.
send that student athlete over to their on-campus resources, which it's great that we still have access to that. But sometimes there's a month wait or there's not the same amount of access that person probably needs.
Right.
So it can get a little tricky and money makes universities go around, and sometimes I think the way that it's portioned out doesn't always make sense. But I will also say I'm not sat behind the numbers either. So maybe it
Yeah.
does make sense. You know,
Yeah.
maybe it does make sense ultimately. I'm not, it's way above my pay grade, but and it's always easy to sit and, maybe critique certain ways that money's spent. But ultimately, I do think that this is something that should be at the top of those budget lists.
For sure. Yeah. So, maybe in the next 10 years, like you're mentioning, that might be more of a priority to the universities.
Yeah.
That would be our only hope. And I know also with the ever-changing industry about the NCAA, I'm not sure if they've passed this in Texas yet. I know Florida has, as far as the sponsorships off of your name as an athlete. How have you seen, you've been in the industry before that and after it, have you
Yep.
seen this change in the way that athletes are carrying themselves, and where is their focus going? Everything like that is where I see that the potential cons could be from that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So yes, it's a thing in Texas, and it's interesting because each state kind of also has their own legislature on it,
Okay.
which hopefully in the next few years, as they start really navigating this stuff, they'll come up with some across the board legislature. But all in all, I think it's a great thing. But I think that there are pros and cons to it. And
For sure.
so I think, starting out with like some of the pros, I think that if a student athlete is able to make money, and that being cash, right? It's not their scholarship, it's not their
Mhm.
room and board or anything like that. It's straight up cash that they are making at this point. Like that can help them. It could help their families depending on their financial situation. It
Mhm.
could, if they are potentially thinking about going to grad school, but maybe they're out of eligibility and, it's going to be hard for them to fund grad school. Maybe they could put it towards grad school in the future,
Right.
or some certifications if they need those for whatever their career may be, real
Mhm.
estate, or, certain things. Or even just postgraduate, like moving across the country. Like moving across the country is not cheap. Or even if you wanted to go travel for a year, to, even if it's not necessarily career based, but it's life based. Like I think that just the financial aspect can open up so many doors for these student athletes. And I think another thing that is really good is that it's also teaching them how to navigate marketing themselves.
Mhm.
um, Now, some of these student athletes that are getting a lot of money, they probably have someone managing that for them.
Wow.
But that's not everyone. And it starts to then go into like your agency, so to speak, like a traditional agency. But I think what is good is that in the NCAA, and I say we, but as a staff member of the NCAA, let's say, like, we are constantly providing you with things. We provide you with dual meet suits, and that's what you have to wear. We provide you with food after you've swum, maybe. And so a lot of things are taken care of for you that in the moment, those student athletes don't always realize. It's when they graduate and they're like, wait, I gotta go buy toilet paper. I gotta go buy, and those are the things that I think this NIL can really help with. Is they're seeing things sooner than they would postgraduate,
Right.
but they're still in this environment where we can help guide that a little bit. And
Right.
so they're still in that safe area of, I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but they're having the conversations with these sponsorships, or they're starting to receive contracts that they have to put their signature on. And
Wow.
so those are the things that I think it is good for. Now, on the flip side of that, if you're handing someone that's 20 years old tens of thousands of dollars, what are they doing with that?
Yeah.
And I think that that is something that I know, just even talking to some coaching peers, that's a concern, because if you're given $20,000, it doesn't mean that you get to go and spend $20,000. You're going to be
No.
taxed on that. And it's, it might just be at the end of the year, depending on how it's set up. And
Yeah,
if
it's
you
most
find
likely
yourself,
1099 contractors, right?
so,
Yeah.
right. And so if you're getting $20,000 and you go and blow that, well, 8 months later, or whenever, in the
Whenever.
year that you do it, 8 months later, you might then owe X amount of dollars and you might not have it.
Right.
And, I think that that is something that it honestly really scares me for some of these athletes, because they don't know how to be financially literate. And
Right.
with that amount of money, it's a little scary, because if you're all of a sudden owing a lot because you've spent a lot, and you don't know why, it's not going to be very fun for them in a couple of years.
No.
So I mean, the place that, so at TCU right now, I think actually the business school has done a really good job. They actually are hosting an NIL class. And
Oh, good.
so and it's credit worthy, it can go towards your degree. And so yeah, if you take that class, you essentially get taught how to approach and navigate these contracts and sponsorships.
That's
So I think that's
amazing.
something that, yeah, I think it's something that they're doing really, really well, because the goal is for them to actually utilize this money for the betterment of themselves, not just
Right.
go and spend it and then all of a sudden they're in trouble in a few years.
Right.
So, and I think, one of the cons to me, and maybe it is a little bit more biased just being in the sport of swimming, but I I do think it's going to essentially make the rich get richer and the poor get poorer as far as collegiate sports.
Hmm.
A lot of this money is going to basketball and football, and then you've got some stars kind of filtered through the rest of the sports, which, I
Hmm.
mean, it's still great that our sport has just as much chance as anybody else. But the car dealerships and whatnot, they're going after the people that are on ESPN every Saturday.
Yeah.
And I think that it's just going to really split what we traditionally knew as the NCAA. It's not
Hmm.
amateur, or it's trending not to be amateur, and it's just becoming a bit more pro league. Which, is that bad or good? We don't know
We'll
just
find out.
yet. It's
Yeah.
unfolding in front of us, but it's definitely an interesting transition that we're going with at the moment. So it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see where we end up in a few years.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And I know it's amazing that your school is offering the NIL class. I'm sure other schools have taken over to hopefully do that as well. Do you feel any pressure, like as a coach and being on the front line of like seeing some of the athletes, whether they're on their phones, they're talking about it with their teammates, to maybe like intervene at all about like, hey, like if you're getting 10 grand, like what are you about to do with it? Do you feel like there's a space for you to talk about it or no?
So we usually kind of let the department guide a lot of that conversation. Obviously, it's a lot to do with the compliance department. At the beginning of this past year, we had a third party come in, and essentially there's an app and a whole platform that our student athletes have access to, and they would report that they have had a sponsorship offer. It goes through our compliance team, and they essentially approve it or not approve it. And there again, that's where those state legislatures can come into play a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. But so we, as coaches, there again, it's something that we kind of leave to the professionals. Ultimately, if it's something that starts interfering as far as time away from the pool, or
Right.
the sport, or it's interfering with the schoolwork, then I think it's appropriate for us to have those conversations. But for the most part, as far as like the actual sponsorship deals and all that stuff, we, at least in this environment, leave that up to the professionals, which in our in our circumstance is our compliance department, but also then that third party who work closely with our department.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
That's so
it's a
cool.
little crazy, but
I
I
can
mean,
imagine, man. That's gonna be
yeah. And it's,
I
it does make me a little, just being in a Power Five school, we do have access to those resources.
right.
Um, and so it does make me a little nervous for the mid-major schools that maybe don't have access. And there again, when I say access, it's also a good word for budgets,
Mm-hmm.
to enable access to those platforms to keep the transactions a little bit more on the safe side and compliant.
Mm-hmm.
But each school is figuring it out as we go, and it will be interesting in 2-3 years down the road how this does unfold.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie. I went on Instagram the other day and I saw one of the girls who's now sponsored by Jolyn clothing.
Right.
And if I felt my whole 8 years of wearing their product, I should have been
Yeah.
sponsored by them.
Right.
And almost before they were getting free advertising.
Yeah.
But now they're paying for it. So I guess that's
Yeah.
really cool. But it's definitely funny to see, the paid sponsorship above like just a regular post that like when I was in college, it would have just been a normal post,
Yeah. Right. Right. No, and
And
it's interesting, and I think a
yeah,
lot of people your age have those similar feelings of like, I could have been making a lot of, or even if it's not a lot of money, maybe you just got that suit for free to then wear it and post about it.
right.
And I mean, a college, who wouldn't take something free
For
or
sure.
to be able to put on social media? So it's, times are very much changing within the NCAA, and it's going to be interesting to see where we are in a few years, I think.
Definitely. Well, cool. Well, I guess I just want to like definitely end on 3 different action items you
Sure.
feel that you can give to these athletes as they transition out.
Yeah. So I was thinking about this quite a lot actually. And, something that actually really came to mind first for me was surround yourself with mentors. And I do think that, like, I was thinking back to when I was just out of college, like, I didn't really know what a mentor was. And in hindsight, I had mentors and I knew that those people were important to me and why they were important to me, but I would never have really labeled them a mentor. Now I know that
Mm-hmm.
they were, and for the most part still are. So I would absolutely surround yourself with mentors. And I think my advice is they don't have to be in your field. They don't have to be people that you've known before. They can be people that you don't know and you've maybe reached out to and you form a connection. And my advice on that would be, if you find a strong connection with someone that has life experience, and if it's in your field, great. You've got to pour into that cup too. Like, mentorship is a very two-way street. It
For
is
sure.
not one way. And a lot of people say, oh, I need a mentor. Well, you've also got to be a really good mentee as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be my, like, kind of first thing is surround yourself with mentors and don't just rely upon one. Everyone's going to have different different opinions or different guidances for you. And I think having probably 3 people that you can call and know why you're calling them is really important. And if those people turn into friends down the line, that's, I think, a really good testament to that mentorship, and that trust was built. And you can talk business, but you can also be friends as well at that point. So surrounding yourself with mentors is probably my biggest piece of advice.
Okay.
Second, I think just listen to your gut. And with that, I also just kind of put the side note of money will always recover itself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the moment, it's very scary, and in the moment, you might not feel like that. But if you're listening to your gut and that something's not right in a
Mm-hmm.
workplace or in just a decision that you've made in life, it's probably true. And if you're staying for the wrong reasons, maybe it's financially, or whatever that reason may be,
Like,
if
oh,
you're
my
not trusting
friends work here,
yourself.
and oh, like
Yeah.
it's
Right.
fun, but I actually hate
Right.
it.
Right.
Yeah.
And you go home every day depleted, and it's not a good
Right.
life for you. And so you've got to listen to your gut, and maybe it is that you don't have an income for 3 months, or you
Mhm.
don't, and sure, you've got to figure that out, and that's not easy. But hopefully where you land next will not only recover that, but it will also give you more of a life that you are enjoying and you want to live. So
Yeah.
just kind of listening to your gut, and not letting things dictate what your gut is telling you.
Yeah.
You
I
can't
can
ignore
definitely,
those things, but you've got to you can't ignore the fact that money's makes the world go round,
for
but
sure.
it's manageable if you're also resourceful.
For sure. I can definitely attest to that, as I took a leap last May
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just up and quit. And for
Yep.
3 months, 3, 4, almost 5 months, I was no income.
Right.
And that's like, not only is it obviously financially a burden, but it's like mentally a burden. I was like,
Yes.
what am I doing? Like, I'm not bringing anything in. I'm not producing. I'm not, there's something about when you are making money and you're able to, you know, buy this or pay your
Sure.
bills on time, do whatever, maybe treat your friend to a drink. There's
Sure.
something that makes you feel good. And when you're not producing, it feels unproductive. And I think it's totally a good point to just make sure deep, deep down that you're doing the right thing for yourself,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that, like you said, money will recover itself and it'll come around. You just have to be patient, for
Yeah.
sure.
No, I agree. And I think would you say that you also, as much as you felt unproductive and all of those other thoughts, do you feel as though you also grew so much during that time too?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I I
It
was,
teaches
yeah.
you a lot. It teaches
You
you a
can,
lot.
for sure, and you can easily get so comfortable
Yep.
in that job that you might be totally overwhelmed with and drained at the end of the day, but like, it's somewhere to go every day. It's a 9 to 5. It's easy, it's comfortable. I know what I'm doing there. And then, to jump out into something that you have to learn everything new, it's hard.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I definitely learned a lot about myself, and just realizing that, like, hey, I have to be a sponge again. And like,
Sure.
never let that go, is to like be a sponge. Like, take
Yeah.
in all the information you can and just learn all the time.
Yeah.
So,
No, for sure. And I think just my last one that I have noted, I always send the email.
I
And
love it.
what that means is, so I was, when was this? This was after about 2 years of coaching. I find myself in a situation where I essentially I needed to get a new job.
Right.
And it was my first time really doing that, like transitioning from a job to a new job. And I'd created some mentorships, and I had good people around me that were giving me good advice, but I essentially emailed like the top 40 coaches in the country. And I was just like,
Wow.
hey, I'm going to be looking for a job. Here's my resume. And my goal in that wasn't to go, I mean, great if it happened, but my goal wasn't to go and work for one of those 40. And I say 40, it was 20 and 20 on the men's and women's, which
Okay.
some of those cross over. But
Right.
um, my goal wasn't necessarily to go and work for someone, but my goal was to make my name be known to them, that if they then heard about something, they could be like, oh, this person actually reached out, here's the resume. And I've and out of those emails, I got two back. Well, it was two more than I would if
Wow.
I didn't send the email, and a year later, I actually, not even a year later, probably about 6 months later, I actually got a call from one of those people and were like, hey, we're going to have an opening. And at that time, I'd already taken a new position. But it, my point here is like, if you don't put yourself out there, then you will never know,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're putting yourself out there, then at least you know that people don't want you around or don't want
Yeah.
to have those interactions. And I think to go along with that is, you've also, if you're going to put yourself out there, you've got to be okay with people saying no to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like sometimes a lot of people put themselves out there expecting the answer to be yes.
Yeah.
And it's not to have a negative connotation about putting yourself out there, but you've got to put yourself out there knowing that there's a really high chance that the answer could be no.
Right.
Um, but if I mean, I do. I since I did that, and then I've done it, in different ways. But I don't know. To me, a unanswered email is better than one that was never sent.
For sure. You would have never known.
So,
And going to sleep saying like, oh,
yep,
I wonder if they would have responded or if they wouldn't have responded. The unknown answer,
yep.
at least you have an answer.
Yeah,
It's better.
exactly. I mean, I use the term email, like that goes for phone calls, it goes for text. I think
Mm-hmm.
in a professional setting, an email is usually the thing that happens, especially if you're attaching a resume or whatnot. But
Mm-hmm. LinkedIn
um,
message, whatever it
yeah,
might be.
exactly. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. So I think that that's something that is, and but I do want to really bring home the fact that like you've got to be okay with the answer being no.
for
Like
sure.
you can't just be like, oh, I'm going to send all of this stuff out. And I've seen it happen time and time again with past athletes that I've tried to help through this transitional period. Oh, I didn't get anything back. Oh, I didn't. And then they're in a funk for like 2 months about the fact that nobody wants to hire them.
Yeah.
And not that those feelings aren't real, but it's also, well, at least you know, and now you can
Mm-hmm.
start to move on. And I think that is also an important part of this transition is knowing how to move on when you've been kicked down, or if you
Mm-hmm.
feel like you've been kicked down. Um, because that's life, is that
Mm-hmm.
just as
You're
it's
going to have
going,
rejection.
yeah, just as it's going well, something's going to come about that you're not expecting or you're not equipped to handle, and you've got to figure it out,
For sure.
because ultimately there's only really you that can do that. But if you have that surrounding of good mentors, then you, at least part of your process to regain that momentum again is, okay, now I know I need to call this person because I know that they're going to be able to tell me this, or I need to call this person because
Mm-hmm.
I know they're going to tell me straight, or I need to call this person because I know they're going to just give me a little bit of love because that's what I need
Yeah.
today. And I think that those are three of the really good things that can help you succeed in the first couple of years out of college.
I love those. Never underestimate the power of networking and meeting
Yeah.
people. You just truly never know when something might stick or when, you know,
Yep.
you never know.
Yep.
I love
Absolutely.
that. Well, thank you so much for all of
Of
your time, all
course.
of your
This
wisdom,
was
all of
fun.
everything. This was so fun. And I hope that, somebody out there gets so much value from this, because at the end of the day, that's really what we're trying to provide.
Yeah.
Really just bridging this gap of that transition and making it as smooth as possible. And hopefully equipping the people, student athletes in general, just to really take on the world,
Yeah.
because I think that they are some of the most strong, dedicated, committed people that you could find.
Yeah.
And a lot of employers know that. So they look for them. However, it also comes with a tax, because you're very committed to your sport and you've put your
Yes.
blood, sweat, and tears in your sport. And you know what pushing your body to the ends, like painfully, like physically pain feels like, and we can push through that. But mentally pain is completely different. And even physical pain out in a different space, right?
Yep.
Like if they go into somewhere else, like we know it towards our sport, and like that's because we love our sport. So this was great.
It's It's been fun. I mean, it's just fun to do something with someone I've coached. And I
Yeah,
think that's also a testament to this, is like, this is something that we have, obviously over the years, like our communication has come and gone, but ultimately at the end of the day, like if you call, I can help. And if I call, you can help. And
for
that's
sure.
the cool thing about college athletics. And I think even just kind of going right back to the beginning of this podcast, when you asked, like, this is the cool thing about college athletics, is
Yeah,
that X amount of years later, we can still do this.
for sure. I love it.
It's
And
cool.
it's all a testament to you as a coach, I will say, and just being the most badass person that you are and being so approachable and so amazing and singing Adele in the car and all that stuff. So
um,
I appreciate you and
it's fun.
everything.
Awesome. All
So
right. Well, thanks so much, Megan. I really enjoyed being on. It's fun.
thanks, Alice. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye.